welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our very special guest author, EWTN host on TV and radio, the one and only Dr. Ray Guarendi, author of Jesus, the Master Psychologist. Listen to him, proudly published by EWTN Publishing. EWTNRC.com for all things Catholic. Always great to see you.
How many times have we been together?
Ray. Many times. Not as many as the books that you've written.
You are one of the few people, because of this program, that has actually read parts of most of my books.
Well, I find your books very interesting. I thought this was kind of, when I first picked it up, it say Jesus, the Master Psychologist, and I see Dr. Ray Guarendi, listen to him. I was a little confused over who I was supposed to be listening to.
They put the names a little different than I wanted them, and they put Jesus as the Master Psychologist.
So do you ever get pushback from somebody who says, well, Jesus, what do you mean a psychologist? Jesus wasn't a psychologist, he was God. What do you mean he's a psychologist?
No, the pushback is, he was a good man. Jesus was a good man. He had good teaching. And I want to say, I'm a shrink. Somebody comes in my office and has all kinds of nice ideas and then says, I'm George Washington, and I'm back from the dead, and I'm going to run for president. I'm going to realize that that person is psychotic.
I think we might have had that experience recently in the last year or two, but as far as that's concerned, you know, it's funny when I was reading that because it reminded me of a scene from The Exorcist where the priest is talking. He said, the demon doesn't claim to be a demon, he claims to be the devil. That's like claiming you're George Washington.
Is that right? Now, I stole that from The Exorcist? I didn't even realize.
Same idea, though, but yeah. Everybody's famous, right?
The dumbest thing.
Past lives or anything else like
the
that.
dumbest thing, Doug, is when people say Jesus was a good teacher. You can't say that. It shows you know nothing about Jesus. Now, he's either fraudulent, in which case that book is ridiculous and burn it, or he's God. And if he's God, then if he disagrees with modern psychology, he's right, they're wrong.
Jesus was not God, but sincerely believed that he was. Then he was seriously disturbed.
Sure, of course. You can't say, I like his teachings, but I'm going to ignore the places where he said he's God. That makes no sense, because how do you pick and choose? And the other thing is this. I have met very few delusional people who make sense when they try to tell you something in other areas. On one hand, you can tell me you're George Washington, but it's only going to be a short matter of time in the next hour interview that you're going to say some really stupid things. Right. And he doesn't. Jesus doesn't.
And as you point out here, and you kind of alluded to before, he allowed no room for anyone to see him just as a sage or a guru or a heady philosopher or just a plain nice guy. He's either God or he's crazy.
Yeah, pretty much. Or he's a liar. I mean, you know that. And if he's a liar, he's a really bad man because people died for him and he knew it.
Right. Well, you also say that the problem with the apostles might have been if they were trying to pull a scam, they really weren't familiar with what you call Propaganda 101.
For heaven's sakes, why would they write? This is Propaganda 101. The communists would tell you this. They didn't write bad stuff about Lenin. They didn't write bad stuff about Stalin. Why? Because they're your founders. Why would you write that, for example, Peter, your number one guy? Oh yeah, I swore to a slave girl, I didn't even know the guy. No, just leave that out. Don't put it in your memoirs. Makes no sense.
Right. You say something earth-shattering must have arisen to transform a bunch of frightened, cowering ex-followers into intrepid challengers of the autocratic Jewish and Roman authorities.
They went up against them. They had no lawyers. They didn't have anybody that could say, hey, we can make a case and we're going to sue you. No, they went against the whole power structure of the day when not only a month before, they were hiding. And they said they were hiding. That's the other dumb thing. Don't say you were hiding. Don't put yourself out as cowards. If you're pulling a scam, you're not very good at it because you're showing too much frailty.
Right, and as we know in history, whether it's Soviet Union, what if they go back and redact the history and correct it to what it is,
absolutely,
so that it
make
looks
me
as
look good.
Exactly. You quote a Christian here. I don't know if it's named. God has given us enough evidence to have a reasonable faith, but not enough to live by reason alone.
That particular Christian has come across some bad times since I put that in there, but it doesn't mean what he said is not good. People say you can't reason your way to faith. Not all the way. But you can get a good distance.
Now you say here about in understanding Jesus, you realize that A, he's a good man. 2, he doesn't have a split personality. 3, he deserves obedience. Why? Why does he deserve obedience?
The only way he could be a good man is if he was God. Then he can be a good man. If he's not God, he can't be a good man. Secondly, if he's God, it's automatic. It follows. If A, then A. In other words, whatever he tells you is going to work. Doug, I asked a priest once, I said, what is the number one thing for you that proves the Christian faith? And he said, the system works. I said, what do you mean the system works? He says, if you follow the Christian morality, you will probably have the highest level of contentment and peace. System works.
That's why you say here, should the whole world disagree with Jesus, he's the only voice that matters.
Well, if he's God, there's no question. If he's not, then just pick and choose what you want from him like you do Buddha or Gandhi.
Right, exactly, kind of the Zen Buddhism, which
Or
is
Mr.
a
Rogers.
Western adaptation. Well, you mentioned him and Tony Robbins together in the same sentence.
People don't know who Tony
I
Robbins
thought
is.
that was a pretty odd combination there, but I didn't want to go into that. Might get King Friday or something upset. You say he is 2 millennia ahead of what psychology is in coming to understand. In other ways, he contradicts what psychology preaches. Now, was psychology more in line with Christian thought and our Lord's thought at one time and now is diverged, or how did that work?
When I use the word psychology, you have to understand that's a big word. And psychologists have all kinds of different ideas and notions. I'm using it as kind of a generic word, which is, what is the generic understanding, for example, of self-image? Now, Jesus says, you're worthless servants. Just say we're just doing our duty. Whoa. That is not a good self-image statement. If he,
Have a whole chapter on that part.
yeah,
Right,
if he
right.
were in a counseling class, he'd fail. You can't say that. So obviously there must be something healthy about recognizing yourself as an unworthy servant. What's healthy about that?
Right, well, you say, what grade would Jesus receive in college counseling class because of dealing with the version we have today of self-esteem that we talk about, even worse, chasing self-esteem for its own sake can lead to some unchristian-like selves. You go on to say unbridled self-esteem naturally morphs into self-focus. But that's what we hear about all the time, is we need to have good self-esteem.
The irony is, the research says that self-esteem isn't related to much of anything. And as a matter of fact, they've done studies with guys in prison. And they've said
They have
that,
very high self-esteem,
yes,
don't
their
they? That's what I
self-esteem is
understood. Right,
disproportionate.
Very
to
high
what it should
self-esteem,
be.
right.
You know, here is the gradient of self-esteem. If I, Ray Guarendi, says, Ray Guarendi's a good guy, and I declare me a wonderful human being, all I'm doing is simply deciding it for myself. I could be way off. If the God of the universe says Ray Guarendi is an invaluable human being, now that's self-esteem, because it is not conditional upon Ray Guarendi's qualities or Ray Guarendi's achievements or Ray Guarendi's declaration.
Let me ask you a question you kind of asked it here. Does a robust self-image undercut virtue?
Yes, it certainly does. Why? Because I have to protect it. I have to protect my self-image. So therefore, if I am hyper-vigilant to anything that would attack my self-image, my self-esteem, as I see it, which is the preeminent virtue, I'm not likely to learn from anything that could help me improve. Why would I?
Well, you also talk about, we hear about it, it's popularized today, cognitive dissonance. And in relation to what you're talking about
Yes.
now, explain that.
On one hand, Christians say, I'm a sinner. I recognize I'm a sinner. But by the way, the irony is, don't get too specific. I'll acknowledge generically I'm a sinner, but don't exactly tell me how. That's when I'll deny it. So on one hand, I'm a sinner. On the other hand, I'm infinitely valuable. How can that be? Those are two ideas that don't go together rationally. But you only have to speak in a God context to make them go together.
In chapter 4, humility is reality. In fact, I found probably of all the books I've read of yours, this is the most important line I've ever read. An old Olympus temple top, a fox and a gazelle vaulted a hedge. That was the most insightful line I've ever read.
Thank you very
Could
much.
please explain
That was
what the
the
insights
12.
are
That
to
was the 12 cranial nerves that I learned when I was in sophomore biology class, and I can still remember a few of those cranial nerves. But the point of that chapter was, Jesus was very good with sound bites. He who humbles himself will be exalted, and he who exalts himself will be humbled. He's very, very good. Do not judge lest you be judged. That stuff's easy to remember. And I'd say he used mnemonic devices long before mnemonic devices were cool.
And now mnemonic devices, in many ways, memorization have been put down over the years.
Yes, that's exactly right.
You know, we used to
We're not
remember
supposed
things,
to memorize.
things like that.
That's right.
you know.
No. Part of the religious phony aspect is that I'm not only superior to you, Doug, I'm infinitely superior to you. In God's scheme, he likes me a lot better than he likes you. That's ugly. That's major league ugly. And Jesus didn't like the sinners. He didn't say, oh, it's good that you sin and I celebrate your sin. He says, I don't dislike you and shun you for your sin. Now let's do something about it. Without that, and by the way, this is not in the book, but parents struggle with condoning versus loving. If I accept my daughter's boyfriend who is living with her, he comes to my house and we have supper and I treat him nice, I'm saying it's okay.
Right.
No, you're not. No, you're not. Jesus ate. He ate supreme fellowship with tax collectors and prostitutes. Is he saying he agreed with that? Of course not.
Right.
He was not condoning it, but he knew without love I have no chance to influence him.
Right, but it was also clear in some way that he didn't necessarily agree with
Oh,
those
of course
people at
not.
the
He
same
didn't say,
time.
this is good, you just stay the way you
Right,
are.
it gave him an opportunity to interface with
Go
them in
and
such a
sin no
way
more.
so that
Yeah.
his example might impact them. So this is the question. I was looking for the test in the back. How do you figure out if you're holy or just a jerk?
I was in Bible study once, and we all talked about why do people get so upset at us Christians? Why is that? You know what it is? We convict them. Because down deep they know we're right, and therefore we're pricking their conscience. And I thought about that, and I said, you know, that could be maybe, but I wonder sometimes if we're just jerky about it, if we're just holier than thou. And I always thought, am I holy or a jerk? And I unfortunately sometimes think I can come across pretty jerky in my holiness.
Is that when the police pulled you over thinking you stole a car from a Christian?
I took those bumper stickers off the car. It's like, that was my car.
You say, again, humility is not seeing oneself as a lowly worm or as a rebellious centuries ago Christians dunghills covered with snow. Of course, you're talking about Luther. You go, contrary to common thinking, humility is not related to insecurity. I thought that was interesting, a naggy sense that I'm not good or competent.
Humility is true self-image. Humility says, I recognize accurately who I am. And I'm solid in that. You know, Doug, if you say to me, you're my boss, if you say to me, you know, Ray, we've just decided we don't want you here anymore. Okay. Now, I can say one of two things. I could say, Doug doesn't know what he's talking about.
Which is a good observation.
Okay. And I've got the poll to prove it here. A lot of signatures on that baby.
Just take a vote of the staff here, they'll tell you that.
The other thing I can say is Doug right? And maybe I'm not very good. I'm not destroyed by that. Why do I have to say I have to be good at that? People come in my office all the time, destroyed. Why? Well, because I got fired. What's that mean to you? Well, it means I'm inadequate. To what? Well, I didn't do the job right. Okay, you didn't do the job right. So what else? Well, I didn't do the job right. What else? I didn't do the job right.
Right.
How are you going any further than that?
Right.
And that's what humility is.
You can get stuck there. So I was wondering, do you have a publication date on your new book on humility titled "The Three Most Humble People I Know and How I Taught the Other Two"?
Yes, and you're one of those people.
I was hoping. I submitted that chapter quite a while ago. I was wondering when we were going to publish it.
I actually heard a sports figure in an interview with the press say, those of you who know me know that my humility is something I'm very proud of.
That's right, exactly. You can't make it up, right? A colleague observed, it's hard to be self-focused when you're grateful.
It truly is.
Right.
If I recognize what I've been given in every way, and that has to be done constantly. You know, when I walk out of this studio, now, the first thing I got to think is, you know, I can talk to Doug. I got a brain that works well enough to talk to Doug. I'm walking. Some people can't walk.
Right.
I'm breathing. I've got clothes. I mean, you could focus endlessly on what you're grateful for.
Right.
And if you do that, I'm not thinking about Ray Guarendi and what a cool dude he is.
We remember Father Andrew Apostle. I remember him just saying, he said, humility is gratitude. It's all about being grateful for what you're given. That's
He's stealing
true
my
humility.
stuff? Is he stealing my
He
stuff?
must, I think he had just finished reading your book, as I recall at the time. But when we see him in the next life, if we can ask him.
Well, that's presumption on your part now. Be careful.
Well, I hope I see him. I know where he is. I don't know where I'm going to be. I'll be calling up to him. You talk about in a childlike, not childish. And then you go on to talk about humility is born with kids.
It is. They got no leverage. When you're a kid, you're totally dependent on every single person around you. You ever see a little kid, you throw them up in the air. Now, they laugh because they totally believe the person underneath them is going to catch them. You and I, if some dude threw us up in the air, what would be? Because we know this guy could drop us. So kids are naturally born with a sense of, I have no power. I'm dependent upon people, which is a good thing if the people you depend upon are dependable. And who's more dependable than God?
Good. In 6, seek to be meek. Now, did you always have an affinity with anthills, or did that come later in life?
That was an analogy I thought of, because let's say you and I look at that anthill and I say, hey, Doug, see that ant over there? He's the strongest one. See that one over there? He's the ruler of the whole colony. See that one over there? He's the smartest one. Would you be impressed? No.
If what you were saying was true, I guess I would
Well,
be.
no, because they're ants, right?
Oh, okay.
So we human beings, we are real impressed with bright people or sports figures or media, famous, whatever. To God, the distance between him and us is far beyond the distance between us and those ants.
Right. I wouldn't be impressed by the ants. I'd be impressed that you knew
That
that
I knew that
much
stuff?
about ants. That's
What am
what
I doing with my time, huh?
That would have impressed me.
Well, you know, the interesting thing, too, is psychologists don't like meek. That's a bad word. That's a cringing kind of let other people step on you, lack of assertiveness word. And, you know, shrinks don't like that. And here you got Jesus saying, be meek.
Looking out for number 1. I haven't thought of that book
Remember
in a long
that
time.
book?
Remember assertiveness, est, all those
They're
things.
still
like
around.
That.
They're
Right.
still around.
Right, exactly. That whole assertiveness. You say meekness and self-confidence are not competing traits either.
No, if I am comfortable in my status as a human being in God's eyes, what could breed more self-confidence than that?
Right.
It doesn't hinge upon who likes me, how many of these I get on social media. By the way, social media, you know what that is? That is a sticker system on steroids, is what that is.
Oh, I see what you mean. Right. Yeah. Well, let me in chapter 7, 3 strikes you're out. Now you're a big softball player. Are you looking to change the rules or something? You say 3 strikes you're out isn't the way it should be.
Peter asked Jesus, how many times I forgive? 7? Peter's figuring, hey, look at this. See that? The rabbis say 3, I say 7. I'm learning from you, Jesus. Jesus ones up him. He says, no, 70 times 7. I discovered, as I've come to know myself, Doug, that I don't need to forgive fully. I really don't. And I realized that most of the time, there's nothing to forgive. I created it in my head.
I see.
I imputed bad motives to somebody that weren't there.
Weren't there in the first place.
So I felt pretty magnanimous of myself. Well, I'm going to forgive my mother-in-law.
Right.
You know, because I'm a Christian. She didn't do anything wrong. Or my wife, who does something perhaps that I think is thoughtless or hurtful, and she didn't mean it that way at all. But I forgave her. I wonder how many times I do that, where there's nothing to forgive other than my head hanging up here in psychological midair.
Right. Well, you also say, decide to forgive. I don't at all feel forgiving. I would be fooling myself. Psychologically speaking, it's not always bad to fool oneself. How so?
The authentic self. The authentic self, Doug, is recognizing my feelings are real and you can't challenge them. So if I don't feel forgiveness, that's real. That is real. And until I alter that feeling, I'm not forgiving. That's incredibly stupid.
In that chapter on True Gold, you say, as the self-esteem tsunami washes over everybody, ironically, a sense of inadequacy and unlovability ensnares more souls. Self-love, separate from God's never-wavering love, is precarious.
Yes, it is. Why is it that the people in our society who look the most famous, the wealthiest, highest status, most adulated, if you look into their lives, the pathology and the misery. Why is this? You would think, well, no, they're going after what we all value. They should be just fine. And in fact, they're moving towards misery. Why? Why? How did that happen? C.S. Lewis says, if there is nothing in this world that can ultimately satisfy us, it must mean we were made for another world.
Right. You say in the mouth control chapter,
I need that one bad.
I didn't say anything. As a therapist, I've said repeatedly, or seen repeatedly, that if heated thoughts were allowed to cool before crystallizing into words, therapy would have far fewer wounds to mend. So I guess count to 10 before you say anything.
I speak out of emotion, and that is hurtful when I speak that way most of the time. What people don't understand is if you just stop for a moment, the surge of emotion dies quickly. It doesn't linger for 27 minutes. Its peak is about 10, 12, 15 seconds. If you get past that peak, you're able to exert the self-control not to say what you just felt you had to say.
Right. You say much sin is born in the head. You go on to say sinful thoughts are not only wrong in themselves, they carry the seeds of sinful deeds. Most therapists agree with Jesus, though they might not recognize him as their mentor.
That's right, because if I'm going to entertain thoughts, and I say to myself, well, I would never do that. And I'm thinking about it, and if I could get away with it, I would. The longer I do that, the more likely I'm going to translate that into action. That's just Psych 101. And Jesus knew it, and the shrinks are much more likely to say, well, as long as those thoughts stay in your head. Can I imagine me going up to my wife and saying, you know what, honey? And I want you to understand that I lust after other women. But it's only in my head. Okay, honey, I'm not going to do anything to be unfaithful. Would she say, well, I'm sure glad, Ray, that that's just in your head. I feel so good about that. Not at all. Or she would say to me, Ray, I entertain the idea that you are a jerk 64% of the time. But I never say anything about it.
Right.
I just think you're a jerk. Those thoughts are going to come out somehow.
Yeah,
they're going to come out.
They get buried alive, as they used to say in the Marriage Encounter. They talk about those things. Chip off the old block. And you got Robert Burns, oh, would some power give us the gift to see ourselves as others see us. Could we even tolerate that?
No. Jesus says you got to get the log out of your own eye to get the speck out of the other guy's eye. Well, he's really implying something. We're blind. He didn't say, get the speck out of your eye to get the speck out of his eye. Oh, no. He made you have the log. That's one of the great things about confession. People will say that to me. What's so good about confession? Well, one of the things from a psychological perspective is it forces you to look at yourself. When I left the church for 8 years, I didn't really look at how I could improve, what I needed to do to be a better human being. I just kind of took it like, well, I'm a sinner and that's the way it is. And I really didn't think about a lot of that stuff. But confession forces you to do that.
Right.
The log, it's chipping away at the log.
In Inflated Value, say, we aren't told to shed material comforts to follow Jesus more closely. Jesus did prod the young rich ruler to do so, but Jesus knew the man's possessions was distracting him from real treasure. So we hear that, we don't want to accumulate goods, like you say, and focus on that if the goods themselves aren't bad in themselves.
The problem with that's a tricky slope.
Right.
Because if we say, having a whole lot of stuff isn't bad in itself, I'm not attached to that. Well, we humans have an incredible ability to self-delude. You are attached to it. Give a third of it away. Oh, whoa, easy there.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
Buddy,
well, you say more is a snare. You got snares. Excess is the norm. More is better. And then you've got accumulation accelerates. The more I own, the more it owns me, which is good. Snare number 5, more satisfies less. And I thought it was interesting, just before we go, I noticed you brought up the book Margin. I remember reading that years ago. Right.
Was it Swenson was the guy's name?
Yeah, Richard Swenson. Yeah, very interesting book.
And he said basically we all live up to the very limits or above in time, in money, in energy. So what happens is we don't have anything to share because we're just right here. I make more money, Doug. I bought a bigger house. You know that, don't you? I make more money. I'm trading that 3-year-old car in. Why should I drive a 3-year-old car? Jesus talked about materialism more than any other sin. He did.
Interesting. So another book in the works?
Scratch and Sniff. It's going to be a scratch and sniff book. Don't scratch and sniff in the Ark, in the chapter on the Ark. No, actually, there is another book in the works, but I'm telling you, I'm running out of gas.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, I'm starting to say, did I say that before? Well, let me just say it again.
Yeah, do you ever get concerned when you're writing stuff that you feel like,
Oh,
wait,
yeah.
I think I wrote this
Oh,
before?
yeah, absolutely. There's no question. That's true. I've discovered the secret to writing a lot of books, though. You can't worry about them being very good. You know, you start working on quality, it slows you down.
That's right. Quantity is where it's at, as always. All right, Dr. Ray Guarendi, thank you. Always a great pleasure. Always fun. Dr. Ray Guarendi, Jesus, the Master Psychologist. He's a pretty good psychologist himself here, too. Listen to him. EWTN Publishing, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Proud to publish it. Check it out and check us out next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark. We appreciate you being here. Thanks.